Hello and welcome to a somewhat belated Atypical Philosopher video for the Frontline update in the Ukraine war on the 26th of February 2023. Let's get straight to the northeastern sector to begin the update. This is the Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna front line. It's been fairly quiet, to be quite frank with you. Not a lot of activity along this area, along this axis. Defmon, who's a pro Ukrainian source, says that the Ukrainians repulsed attacks in the area of Maziutivka and Nevska. So that's one right up the top. If we have a look up here, one right at the top near Kupiansk and one right down near Kreminna. But really, not a lot else to report from him. Uh, smaller positional battles and probing attacks along the front line. There has been a claim in the ISW that the Russians say that they have put an end to a Ukrainian counterattack in the Stelmakivka area. So if we go to the ISW, they said that Luhansk Oblast administration head Serhiy Haidai stated Ukrainian forces repelled Russian forces attempting to advance with heavy equipment in the Svatova area. Geolocated footage posted on the 24th shows Ukrainians shelling the Russians in Dzherelna, which is sort of west of Svatova, and that a Russian reserve unit claimed that they disrupted a Ukrainian counterattack in Stelmakivka. So there is stuff going on right up from Maziutivka, so that is in this area. We just zoom in around Liman Pershi, just to the north of there, should be there, Maziutivka. There's activity around there, and then we come down towards Svatova, and we have Svatova there. Shelling of the Russians in Zherelna, and an attack around Stelmakivka from the here it is, from the Ukrainians pushing towards Svatova area, apparently repelled according to the Russians, and then down Nevsky, a repelled attack from the Russians in that general direction, and then we get to the Kremna area. So what can we say about Kremna? A few things to show here. So situation around Kremna is similar to the other parts of Russian-occupied Luhansk, says German source Tendar. Russians try frantically to push through the forest south of Kremna, but cannot overcome the Ukrainian defenses. And here is his map. At Pavlivka, they have lost ground against counterattacking Ukrainians. Pavlivka is just south of the forest here. That area there, apparently they have lost ground. That's according to Tendar. I know they had lost ground recently, but I don't know. I don't have too much more detail on that. We're going to have a look at what ISW has to say. Ground attacks continued around Kremna from the Russians. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces have conducted unsuccessful attacks near Nevska, Bilorivka, and Serebryanska forest area. Haidai has claimed that Russian forces suffered heavy losses in an assault near Kremna, with 70 killed in action and about 70 wounded in the course of a three-company assault. So that's another piece of the jigsaw there. Near occupied Kremna, the Russians are building up their defense lines. This is evidence of their dragon's teeth, as well as no doubt lots of other stuff. Revetments to possibly keep equipment in, or certainly extensive trench networks, and of course there'll be mines and other anti-tank trench um, fortifications as well. So definitely going on around the Kremlin area, but we'll go to pro-Ukrainian source here, Defmon, to just update us with what's going on in the Kremlin-Seversk area. The Ukrainians have repulsed attacks in the area of Serebryansk Forestry, Bilorivka, Spirina. The Russian MOD has claimed shelling of the Ukrainians close to Dobrova and Kuzmyrna, which means the front line have not moved significantly. So not too much of a change I'm going to make to the line around there. There is some claim that maybe the Russians have been pushed back a little bit around Bilorivka. But essentially, and there's some activity around Spirna, but essentially we're going to get down to talk quite a bit about the northern area of Bakhmut to begin with, and of course Bakhmut in general. There's been quite a bit of activity, as you can guess, around here. Syriac Maps last night had mapping of the Russians making some gains around Yehidne and around Bakhivka towards this small settlement just to the west of Bakhivka, called Dubovo Vasilivka. So I need to move my Ukrainian lines back there. Let's have a look and see what actually Kenneth Runt says on behalf of Kenneth Gregg, who's a Swedish fighter in Ukraine. He says the title today is Water is a Resource. Our engineered troops have been active for the last 24 hours north of Bakhmut, and your donated waders have been a great help. The enemy was dangerously close to breaking through our lines at Yehidne and Bakhmut. The situation was very critical, and to our aid, we brought in water. This was done by blowing up two small dams, whereby a small narrow channel became a wild river. The same thing we did outside Kiev. We also had another dam on standby, a much larger one. Interesting. So, you might see some more activity in that manner again. On Deep State map, you can see the attack from the north has stopped. The enemy's advance east of the city has slowed down. South of Bakhmut at Ivanivska, we have pushed them back about 2 kilometers. At the same time, they advanced on a narrow strip about 3 kilometers from our counterattack directly towards the town, but suddenly found themselves surrounded from three directions. This new situation caught the enemy off guard, and now they must come up with a new plan or quickly get engineered troops to the area. A smart move by ours, also smart to use local knowledge of the natural resources. At Kreminna, which we've just seen, we have again moved a brigade towards Bakhmut, the third brigade to be moved in a short time. We have also moved into position for defense of Kreminna. Now I'm beginning to speculate wildly, but doesn't it smell like another brilliant maneuver by the same general who initiated the Kharkiv offensive with such success? At Vuhledar, the enemy have again reinforced with a regiment and a brigade. Here too, they've decided to take a city with lots of casualties. Okay, so lots to take in there. What he's talking about with regard to the blown dam is here. So let's have a look at some of this. So, in an attempt to delay the successful advance of the Wagner group to Bakhmut, Ukrainian soldiers blew up a dam north of the city and now floods the settlement of Stupki. Ukrainians are withdrawing from this region. Let's just put that into the context of my map. So there's been this growing success around Bakhmut and Yehidny. Uh, Yehidna, and then that is getting close to this sort of water feature there, and they have blown the dam there that has flooded up to Yehidne and has done basically this much. So this is what Andrew Perpetua has done in mapping out the flooding. So you've got that water feature there. They were in Yehidne, the Russian forces here, and he said, I mapped out the flood area for the dam Ukraine destroyed in Bakhmut today. I don't know if there is enough water to impact all of this, but this is the area downstream. I've seen people who appear to think it will wrap south along the city, but no, the river runs north, going south is uphill. So you can see that this would cause a lot of problem for an advancing army if they're, trying to advance right across this sort of axis there. If we go back to this evidence here, let's have a look at the waters flowing. So those are the waters flowing, and you can see there the edge of the water feature. That's where the dam was blown, and all that water is going to flow sort of northeast, perhaps, to halt the incoming Russians. There is a little bit of a gain for the Russians in that area. That's the same as Syriac maps there. That little bit of gain there, and then yeah, you can see it doesn't really tell you an awful lot. And the idea is that the Ukrainians are pulling back whilst blowing the dam and slowing down the retreat of the Russians as that water flows down there. You can see where the water course runs. Um, what can we say from? Let's have a look at ISW next. Actually, no, not ISW. I'll tell you what's a good thing to look at, which is this GIF of the how the Russians have increased their territory north, particularly well, all around Bakhmut. But you can see the movement over the last sort of week or so, last couple of weeks, and we'll try and get it to run back to the beginning. So here we are. You can see them coming down, and getting towards Yehidny, and here's that dam that was blown last night. So as you can see, as the Russians are getting down here, and you got this Stupki area, it would then sort of flood all along here and stop them advancing too much further down into those settlements. But there's lots of activity as well south in Ivanivska area too. If we just zoom out a little bit, there are various claims about the Ukrainians now putting defenses up around Bodanivka, Hirorivka, And Rybar has claimed there are claims that Dubova-Vasilivka is indeed under Russian control. Indeed, Defmon makes a comment of this. The Ukrainians have repulsed attacks in the area of Fedorivka, Berkivka, Ivanivska, Orihovo, Vasilivka, and Bakhmut. Berkivka and Yehidne are most likely captured by the Russians. Rybar claimed that they captured Dubovo-Vasilivka, but no evidence is provided. And as you can see, these are where the arrows are. Lots of attacking all around that whole area, and Bakhmut is looking, gradually smaller and smaller in terms of Ukrainian control. Uh, ISW says geolocated footage published on the 24th of February indicates that Russian forces likely made marginal advances in eastern Bakhmut. The Ukrainian border services reported that Russians have committed their most combat-ready forces to Bakhmut and that there are many Wagner Group convict personnel around the city. So a mix of everyone you would gather from that. Let's have a look at what Rebar says. In the North Bakhmut, Wagner assault units completed clearing Yehidny. The settlement is under Russian control. The loss of Yehidny forced the personnel of the 25th Infantry Battalion to withdraw from one of the quarters in the area of Stupki. So Stupki is this area here. Yahidny and then coming down into Bakhmut. So Rebar then continue. In addition, Wagner entered the Buvo-Vasilevka, from which paratroopers of the 46th Air Mobile Brigade of the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces departed from Bodanivka at night under the cover of artillery. The Ukrainians are firing at the village with the help of MLRS and assault aircraft. Now Ukrainian units are rapidly preparing the defense line around Rivka and Bodanivka, Chasiv Yar. ATGM, so anti-tank guided missiles of firing positions, are being equipped in apartment buildings of Chasiv Yar. You can imagine that, and that's very much like Vuhledar down south. After the final clearing of Yehidny and Dubovo-Vasilivka, the most logical direction of impact will be Kromovo. It is through this suburb, along with Bakivka, that the remaining supply routes of the airfield grouping on the northern outskirts of Bakhmut passed. Northwest of Soledar, the command of the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Air Force Air Assault Forces expects the activation of Wagner assault units and units of the regular Russian army at the Zalizhnyansky Vasyukivka line. Ditches and trenches are being equipped on the defense line. And it says these special forces for the Ukrainians were rotated at the Toretsk sector, that's further down south, which is to say, goodness me, lots of stuff there. So there is defenses being put around the Vasyukivka to Zalizhnyansky line there, and they're defending around Hirivka and Bodanivka, but what Rebar is saying is that Kromove here is the area that obviously they need to protect, because if that goes, really, as the Russians come southwest, if they take that, then they're going to interdict the main supply route that comes in from the west. And we already know that this route here is a bit of a problem, given that it's very close to the front lines. It has been interdicted, I think, previously, and the bridge there has been blown. So it might require back roads coming in. I don't know where the back roads particularly are around there. I'd have to zoom in without this being shown. So yeah. Um, Back roads might be able to get down to through. Yeah. So again, it is Kromovi. So I don't know that there's maybe a tiny roads coming in there, but they're going to be sort of dirt tracks, really. Considering you're going to have to come to the east of where the bridge was blown. So there. So yeah, really, unless there's some dirt tracks possibly down here coming into Ivanivska, you're in trouble. If Kromova goes, really, Bakhmut's on the way out. You'd be expecting an operation withdrawal by then. So therefore, the Ukrainians are going to be trying their hardest to stop the Russians, just southwest of Yahidny. They can't let them get across that land towards Kromove, because I would imagine it's kind of all over by then. But what do I know? There are apparently marginal gains in the east. Not sure of any particular detail. I haven't changed my map around there. I have changed my mapping around this Ivaniska area. So there are these claims that actually, as you heard from Kenneth Gregg there, that there were some counterattacks around here. It appears that they have been pushed back from this area, the Russians. And indeed, this area is. I was talking about how they had got closer. Now I've taken it back from my yesterday's mapping. They've gained a little to the. This is the Russians I'm talking about, to the west of the canal, just further south. But they have certainly been pushed back from the Ivaniska road, from the T0504 main supply route that comes in. So a little bit of good news for the Ukrainians around there, and the Russian advance has slowed north, but it's not just about the north; it's about spreading out to the northwest as well, and moving in this direction towards Bodanivka, and as I say, circling Bakhmut round north of Kremovo and down. So we'll see what happens there. It's certainly been quite dynamic over the last sort of week, and that has been dynamic in the favour, obviously, of Russia for the most part. Just don't know whether it's going to be holding on for as long as possible or considering some kind of major counterattack, whether that is a possibility and whether that is advantageous for the Ukrainians or whether that would, in fact, grind out a trit too many of the Ukrainian forces. Few last things to say about Bakhmut here. Ocean Defender says, according to sources on the ground near Bakhmut, it is reported that Russian Wagner forces have broken through Ukrainian defensive lines in the northwest of Bakhmut and have advanced to the settlement of Bodanivka. So this is actually the claim that Bodanivka um, over here. They have advanced to Bodanivka. I doubt that's true. I mean, they might have got that far, but that seems very much wishful thinking, maybe on the Russian front. But they could have done, and then of course, if that is the case, then Kromova really is in trouble. No reports has just forwarded on this video that I think is just another indication of what Bakhmut is really like. I do like to once in a while play you these videos to give you a sense of the to give you a sense of the places that I'm listing on a map. I think that's probably sounds put on the top of this. This would be silent drone footage. Because obviously there are cuts but continuous sound, so I'll take the sound off because that isn't therefore genuine and accurate. But yeah, you can see that Bakhmut is a shadow of its former self. Um, it has survived remarkably well before it's got to this point. I've said for some time actually that I'm quite surprised that Bakhmut hasn't been treated much like Vuhledar and other places where they flatten it and then go in. And I don't know if that's a reflection of the claim that Wagner mercenaries haven't really had too much artillery support and have run out of artillery shells. And I think if this had been uh, 8 months ago, you would have seen Bakhmut flattened and been in this state much sooner than it is now. And the last thing to say is that apparently a Su-25 Russian Su-25 jet has been shot down in the Bakhmut area. I think the pilot. I'm not sure. I think there's another report somewhere else. I think the pilot might be safe, or actually, don't quote me on that. So I won't comment. Anyway, let's move to Avdivka now. So just before we get to Avdivka, as we pass New York, Shumi, New York, we come to Novobakhmutivka. Some claims. This is from Tendar saying north of Avdivka, Russians tried something rather new by attacking north of Novobakhmutivka with several armored vehicles, but they were spotted and the attack was blown to pieces. Of course, that's very general sort of claims there, but it could be that the Russians did lose some material in the area. But as far as Avdivka in general is concerned, the Russians have made some small advances south of Avdivka near Vodyani, going westwards. Rebar talks as well about this. Russian troops resumed a positional offensive on the defensive lines of the Ukrainian 59th Motorized Infantry Brigade near Pervomaisky, so that's just south of Vodyani. After taking the heights north of Vodyani, the Somali Assault Battalion consolidated and advanced to Avdivka, improving the tactical situation. South of Vodyani, Russian forces encircled a stronghold of the 59th Brigade and advanced in the fields between Pervomaisky and Vodyani. So this is to say that there's some advances just sort of around these areas. Just not here, Vodyani seems to be a very long, thin settlement that goes north of this water feature, and they've taken some of this land here. Rebar talked there about sort of going northwards towards Avdivka. I don't have any mapping details of that, but possibly some further advances south towards Pervomaisky, and some claims over the last few days about Novelsky attacks near there as they try to take Novelsky in order to allow themselves to encircle Pervomaisky, which is another long, thin settlement. Proves very difficult to fight your way through it. And then we come down to Marinka. There are these claims, not too much, not hearing anything really about the center of Marinka and north of Marinka, but there were these claims over the last few days that the Russians pretty much got into the outskirts of Pobjeda, which is this small settlement that disallows the Russians to encircle Marinka. So it's a very important settlement for the Ukrainians to continue to control. And the Russians got pretty much there, but I think they've been repelled and they are now sort of further back than they had been. So it seems like there's fairly intense fighting around Pobjeda. And then we come down past Novomykhailivka towards Vuhledar. Vuhledar, as you well know by now, I assume, is this small settlement, sort of a random town, just with no kind of suburbs or anything, just like these huge apartment blocks sticking up out of nowhere at the top of a sort of hill that allows them line of sight down to Pavlivka and Mikilska here. There's been fighting. The Russians have lost huge amounts of troops and material around here, and there's fighting between Mikilska and Pavlivka. If we go to ISW, there's quite a bit to say here. So one of the so who is this chap? He is a Ukrainian Tavrisk operational director, representative of the Ukrainian Tavrisk operational direction, Oleksiy Dmitrievsky, has reported that Russian forces have not changed their tactics around Vuhledar, but that lately there has been an increase in Russian forces conducting assaults without armored support. Goodness, so they're even regressing to worse tactics, and even some instances, or maybe not, maybe they realise that the armored equipment is just getting blown up by mines, so if they can just get close enough and offload troops, then maybe the troops can make a difference on their own. And even some instances of armored personnel carriers driving infantry to the front line for dismounted assaults and then withdrawing. He reported that the 155th and 40th Naval Infantry Brigades of the Pacific Fleet have merged into one brigade because of significant losses in the Vuhledar area, and the Russian forces deployed a Rosgvardia Special Rapid Response Unit, so those are like riot police, into unit to prevent these personnel from rioting and refusing to fight. Wow, if that's true, that's really problematic. In fact, the UK intelligence statement that's released every day today talked about how terribly the Russians are doing in Vuhledar and a real problem for these two naval infantry brigades and how they've effectively been, almost rendered combat ineffective. He also reported that Russian forces transferred an unspecified number of personnel by bus from Melitopol to the area to replenish the 150th and 40th Naval Infantry Brigade. So, if you remember these supposedly busloads of Wagner troops, you saw sort of 43 buses go to Melitopol. Um, and it could be that they are being drafted into the Vuhledar area to just continue doing what they've been doing, which is sending people to their deaths. A Russian mill blogger, on the other hand, has claimed that Russian forces still hold positions in the Dacha areas near Vuhledar and continue to inflict heavy losses on Ukrainian forces. I find that hard to believe because I think that Ukrainian forces will be largely, if they do have positions in these dachas, so you've got the dachas here, and possibly here as well. But if they are these ones near Vuhledar, they aren't going to be inflicting heavy losses on the Ukrainians, because I think the Ukrainians would be just stuck in these apartment block buildings, not in like huge concentrations, but raining down artillery fire and ATGMs on the Russians as they approach. So I think that's probably very unlikely. If anything, the Ukrainians will be losing more forces down here if they've done a counterattack and taken this area. And there are lots of trenches around here as well, so it could be more attritional down in this area rather than actually in Vuhledar itself. But that's just my tuppence. Okay, so that's pretty much that for Vuhledar. Let's move on to Zaporizhia and Kherson. It's just worth, I think, reading out some of this ISW summary for the area. So, Russian forces continue to struggle to conduct effective combat operations on the Zaporizhia Oblast front line. Ukraine's main military intelligence directorate, the GUR, has released an intercepted call in which a Russian service member claimed that 120 soldiers of the Russian 503rd Motorized Rifle Regiment tried to conduct reconnaissance near Shebaki, but Ukrainian forces struck all 120 personnel. And that may be the one I'm planning on sharing well, now be tomorrow's extra, uh, that I think Dmitry War Translated has done a translation of. Uh, and yeah, pretty devastating. Ukrainian officials reported that Russian forces continue to establish military positions in civilian areas on the east or left bank of the Kherson Oblast. Head of the Ukrainian Joint Coordination Press Center of the Southern Forces, Khumenyuk, stated yesterday that Russian military positions in civilian areas complicate the Ukrainian ability to strike against Russian positions. So that could be a way of basically Russian forces using human shields. Khumenyuk also stated that Russian forces have moved the majority of their forces tens of kilometers back from the Dnipro riverbank, are reinforcing their positions with mobilized personnel. Uh, we've heard this before, and then we heard that they're moving in closer, and now they're moving in back again. So, not quite sure what's going on there, but that's if we come uh, westwards past the Zaporizhia Oblast front line and towards Kherson. So yeah, that there is activity always going on along here. Lots of shelling, but I don't know whether the shelling has sort of calmed down a little bit, as both sides seem to be struggling with supplies of ammunition. Um, that said, I'm fairly sure Kherson is hit on a consistent basis. Anyway, that's a frontline update for the 26th, February the 26th. Thank you so much for bearing with me. That is a little bit late, and it will be broadly out of date. The Ukrainians are probably just looking at the weather now, or the daylight now. The Ukrainians will have finished fighting for the day. They're ahead of me in the UK. So actually, that was yesterday's like front line. It's just, I'm sorry, it's a late video today, so expect many changes to be made to that already, that will be filtering through in the coming hours. I will speak to you a bit later. Thanks so much for your support. Take care. Toodle bits.